Letter of credit. In a previous video, Niryat Bandhu explained to Nikhu the various payment methods, one of which was letter of credit. Since LC method is an important method of payment, we will explain them in more detail here. To begin, an LC payment involves the buyer's bank and Nikhu's bank. Payment is made when seller submits the documents such as invoice, bill of lading, etc. to her bank as proof of shipment. The LC protects the seller against payment default by the buyer. An LC also protects the buyer since no payment obligation arises until the goods have been shipped by seller as promised. Who are the parties involved in a letter of credit? The applicant is the buyer who approaches its bank to issue an LC in favor of the seller. The buyer's bank is called the issuing bank. Nikhu, the seller, is the beneficiary in whose favor the LC is issued. Advising bank is the bank which receives the LC from the issuing bank for the beneficiary. Besides the advising bank, there can also be nominated bank and a confirming bank on behalf of the beneficiary. What are the steps in a letter of credit? Buyer and Nikhu agree to the terms such as means of transport, period of credit offered, the last shipment date acceptable, etc. Buyer applies to the issuing bank for the issue of LC. Bank then evaluates the buyer's credit standing, etc. On issuing the LC, the issuing bank sends it to the advising bank through mail or electronic means such as SWIFT. Advising bank informs Nikhu. Nikhu checks the conditions mentioned on the LC against the agreement. Nikhu ships the goods and puts together the documents like bill of lading, etc. called for in the LC and submits to the advising bank. Advising bank checks the documents against the LC. If found correct, it pays Nikhu and forwards the documents to the issuing bank. Issuing bank debits the payment from the buyer and releases these documents to the buyer. What are the benefits of letters of credit? Letters of credit are legally binding and all parties must honor it. So, they offer less risk for the buyer and Nikhu. They reduce ambiguity and increase transparency for both sides as the details about the goods, its delivery, etc. are all well defined in an LC. Letter of credit operations are governed by UCP rules framed by the International Chamber of Commerce, that is ICC. LCs are internationally used. It provides firms confidence to trade in unfamiliar markets with unfamiliar suppliers. What are the different types of letters of credit? Irrevocable letter of credit. A revocable LC can be changed or cancelled by the issuing bank on its own. On the other hand, an irrevocable LC can be changed or cancelled only when all parties, that is, the buyer, seller, and the mediating banks agree. Nikhu should always try for an irrevocable LC. Confirmed letter of credit. This provides additional security for the seller. Here, another bank other than the issuing bank adds its guarantee. If the buyer's bank fails to make payment, this confirming bank will guarantee payment. Usance letter of credit. Here, payment is released at a later date and not immediately on receipt of documents. Back-to-back letter of credit. This is usually opened by a middleman who would buy from Nikhu and sell to a buyer. The original LC is opened by the buyer for the middleman. The middleman then opens a back-to-back LC for Nikhu against the security of the original LC. This gives security of transaction to the buyer, middleman, and also to Nikhu. Transferable letter of credit. These again are used when middlemen are involved. Under this LC, the middleman can request the nominated bank to transfer the payment directly to Nikhu. Standby letter of credit. Unlike a standard LC, a standby LC allows seller to obtain payment even when the buyer has failed to pay as per the bond. This is similar in nature to a bank guarantee. Red clause letter of credit. This allows the seller to receive partial payment prior to shipment. When taking an LC, Niku should make sure to check the conditions on the LC. She should also check the credibility of the issuing bank. Further, she should note that LC is still subject to risks such as change in buyer country's policies or risks of fraud, etc. by the buyer. Hope this video helps Niku in finalizing an LC.